Welcome back to our town hall, Finding Hope, Battling America's Suicide Crisis. And a reminder, if you're struggling right now or you know someone who may need help, please reach out to any of the organizations that we're showing you on the bottom of the screen throughout this hour. You're not alone. Reach out. Family and friends often wonder about the warning signs of suicide. Sometimes there may be no indication, but many times there are things to look for if you know how to identify them. Joining me again is Dr. Moutier, and with me now also is Talinda Bennington, who lost her husband, Chester Bennington, the lead singer of Linkin Park, to suicide. Also with us is Kirsten Powers, who recently wrote about her own experience during a difficult time in her life when she was coping with thoughts of suicide. She's a USA Today columnist, a CNN political analyst, and co-host of the Faith Angle podcast. Talinda, first of all, I'm so sorry for your loss, and I appreciate you being here. I think when somebody well-known dies by suicide, there's such shock. So many people wonder how somebody at the pinnacle of their career, how this could happen to them. And obviously in a family, there's always shock. Were there warning signs that you saw at the time or that now in retrospect stand out to you? Absolutely.
Absolutely there were. I am now more educated about those signs, but they were definitely there. The hopelessness, the change of behavior, isolation, that was all part of our daily life. Sometimes some signs were there more than others. Some signs they weren't there at all, as the case right before he passed. He was at his best before he passed. We were on a family vacation, and he just had to go back home to do a television commercial, and I was going to see him the next day. It was just the timing of it. You know, he had been in states of depression before, and he had had past attempts. This was not a time where any of our families suspected this to happen, which is terrifying, you know, because it could happen at any moment with those thoughts.
Kirsten, I mean, you wrote just recently in just an incredibly powerful way, and that I think really impacted a lot of people, about a depression that you were going through and that impulses you started to feel towards suicide. Had you felt it before, and what?
No, I had never felt it before. Now, I've struggled with anxiety my whole life, so I had sort of episodes of feeling very anxious. I'd never had any feeling of actually thinking through how I might kill myself. And this was after my father had died. I just left my job, and I was freelancing and had a relationship breakup, and so I had a whole bunch of things kind of piling.
All of those are huge factors.
Right, piling on each other, and a lot of changes, and I started to have these feelings and thoughts and really imagining, and even at one point, like, opened the oven and put my head in and kind of pulled back when I thought about my younger brothers. And the thing is, you know, sort of to your point, I mean, people knew that I was certainly having a hard time. My father had died, but most people, even when I wrote my column, said we had no idea.
You lost a huge amount of weight, and people kept saying to you, "Oh wow, you look fantastic."
Yeah, I lost like 20 pounds in 6 weeks, and you know, I probably lost most of it in the first 3 weeks. Yeah, and people would be like, "Oh, you look amazing," and you know, you're living the dream, and you have. And even when I would say, you know, I'm having these crazy thoughts, and people would just be like, "Oh, you're so strong, you're so," you know, and. I think one of the things I wanted to get through in my column was it only lasted a couple months, and I barely made it. You know, it was so hard. Every day was so hard that when you see somebody like a Kate Spade, who they say was struggling for 5 years with depression, I can't imagine.
Also interesting because, you know, people feel the blues in their life. Mm-hmm. Depression is far more than just the blues, and if you haven't experienced it, it may be hard to understand what somebody is going through and the seriousness of it, because people say, "Oh, you can pull yourself out of that," you know.
For sure, and I don't suffer from depression. I never have. And watching my husband go through it, I had no idea. I could not relate. And over the years, I educated myself to the best of my ability. However, I did not understand the severity of his thoughts. He shared them with me. We got him help, and everything happened at a time I can't stress enough. And we thought everything was okay. It just took us by surprise.
Well, one of the things that for me, took me a long time to kind of understand is that oftentimes it's not a rational thought that somebody's having. I mean, Kirsten wrote about it as an impulse, as you know, Jesse Close was talking about this voice, that it's, and that can be very hard, I think. I mean, in terms of warning signs, what do you tell people to watch out for, or recommend people watch out for?
Right. Well, I think we're hearing about so much of it, and how it actually plays out in real life can be very, very cloaked. So we can look at the list of warning signs, and it's really important to get educated about that. It absolutely is. But then understand that the loved ones in your life are not going to hand that to you on a platter. They're going to be indicating it in very subtle ways.
We're going to put some of those warning signs, I think, on the screen. Feeling hopeless, like a burden to others, depression, anxiety, lack of interest, withdrawing, easily angered or agitated, increased drinking or substance use.
Yes, and I really want to also bring us back to this idea of picture the worst physical pain that you have ever been in your life and the way that affects you and you're thinking at the time. You're not thinking straight. It's excruciating. Mental anguish, psychological pain is exactly like that and just as disabling and painful. But again, to help people understand, how does a person keep functioning and sort of on the surface of it look like themselves? Now, again, I think we need to learn to pay attention at a more subtle level.
To Linda, I also think people look for a simple explanation. It happened because of this reason or that reason. I know you have talked publicly about sort of almost like building blocks in your husband's lives of issues that sort of grew one on top of the other, and that there is no one necessarily explanation.
Absolutely, yeah. It's a lifetime of building blocks to unhealthy mental behavior, emotional pain, and if we can find good coping mechanisms, if we have people we trust that we can talk to, that helps us to make better choices for ourselves. And my husband didn't have that in a lot of situations. He also self-medicated. So, I mean, that changes the chemistry of the brain. And if you're already genetically prone to depression, that all changes your brain chemistry. And, you know, if you don't take care of that early on, and if you don't, it's a continuing method of care. You have to keep it going.
Kirsten, I mean, I've known you for a couple of years now. I had no idea that you had this experience. Was it hard to be public about it, to write about it? And was it rewarding to have so many people approach you afterward and say...
Well, we were talking about this actually in the green room. I was saying even 5 years ago, I don't think I would have written this because I was so consumed with appearing together and wanting to look, you know, and that because of the stigma and these kinds of things. And I think I've sort of, as I've gotten older, I've started to understand that I need to sort of let go of that, but also the person who I interviewed is my fiance's brother, who's one of the leading suicide prevention experts. And I said, is there something that's being missed here, you know, in the coverage? And he said, well, yeah, actually what really helps people is to hear stories from people in the public eye who have contemplated suicide and not gone through it.
And that there is a way through it.
Yeah, there's a way through it, and I'm very happy now, and I have a good life, and I've learned to manage my anxiety. And so there is a way to get there, and so I felt I have to do it. But it was totally worth it because I heard from so many people, strangers, including people I know, you know, saying to me, I suffer from depression, and I had no idea.
Linda, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And Kirsten as well.